Hello everyone, welcome to Book 2, Night 9 of the Orphan's Tales Live quarantine reading series, since some of us are still in quarantine. All of us should be, but some of us still are. It is hot AF, but I'm still wearing my long sleeves. I've pushed my sleeves up, but I'm still wearing my long sleeve shirt for y'all. Yeah, so, nothing too new. I've been working hard all day, so I'm still a little bit head in a different book, newer book by 20 years. So I apologize for any airheadedness that pops into the stream tonight. Should be fun for all. We're moving right along up to page 157 if you are following along at home. Which means that we're actually approaching the end. We've only got we've got less than 100 pages left in the end of this first half of the book. As I have explained many times, The Orphan's Tales was written as a 4-book series and was combined into a duology by the publisher, but it is still divided within that duology into 4 books. So we're less than 100 pages from the end of this cycle and the beginning of the last one. Oh, thank you, 8th the Robin. That's very kind of you. I will do my intro stuff here, and then we'll get right into it. Well, as always, this is, for legal reasons, not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. It is a play, a one-woman show. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can buy copies of them at your local independent booksellers web portal. If you would like to patronize my local independent bookseller, it's printbookstore.com in Portland, Maine. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti, babbling about any number of things, some more important than others. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valenti as well, and read the first 6 chapters, I think, of the book that I am almost finished with and was working on today, as well as tons of other things. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live on YouTube. You can ask me questions when the stream is over, but it's best to think of them while I'm reading so that we don't have any dead air while I awkwardly sip my drink and raise my eyebrows and wait for someone to say something. And if you are so moved, you can toss a coin to your witch and put something in the tip jar, which is on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, and on my website at catherinemvalenti.com. And thank you so much to Annette and Deb, who tipped me last time. You guys are my heroes, and it's such an amazing thing that you have done to contribute to the very tight belt running of our household right now. This is a really, really difficult time for freelancers, so anything you can give is deeply, deeply appreciated. And I will thank you by name on the next stream if you do, unless you don't want that. You tell me that you don't want that, in which case I won't. All right, so, all right, as Lord McConaughey would say. Let's get right back into it. I'll just pop up the illustration before we start so you can see this little lizard tangle. Little lizard puppy pile there, and then we'll all understand it together in a minute. This is another section I have no memory of. No idea what the Ferryman's tale is all about. Probably a boat at some point. I don't know. We'll see. I feel bad, but you guys understand at this point, the life of a writer is constantly filling and emptying your head into a bowl and then publishing that bowl. But once I have emptied my head, it doesn't refill. So we'll see. We'll see how all this goes. All right. The tale of the crossing continued. I have followed her. I have always followed her. She is there on that island. I know she is, and I am going to save her. We save each other. It's what we've always done. I was made to save her. She was made to save me. Idle frowned into the sky, black and boiling with the oncoming storm. How did you spend the last 3 coins? Why do you care? Isn't it enough that you have one of them? Call it an interest in numismatics, the old man chuckled. Seven covered his eyes with his rough, knuckle-split hand. He forced back tears, though his throat threatened to strangle his words. He could not make his voice steady. It was ragged and broken, the sound swallowed up by the great glassy lake and the rumbling sky. I spent them to get here. I spent them to find her. I spent them to get farmers and astrologers and idle princes and dairywomen to tell me where she'd gone, map-makers and poets and river pilots and necromancers to tell me how to follow after her. I spent them to get her back. What else are they good for? What else could they buy? I spent them to buy her back. I spent them to cross the lake. I spent them and they're gone, and all I have is an empty sleeve. He broke into fog-softened sobs, and the old ferryman might have comforted him, indeed leaned forward to do so, had not a thin, reedy wind blown by, a wind like the last gasp of a man frozen to death on a barren snowfield. The wind blew aside Idle's shabby brown cloak, and Seven saw what was beneath it. He meant to scream or cry out, but all that his lungs could manage was a groan and a slack jaw. Idle's skin ended at the base of his throat. The rest of him was all bones, great, long yellow bones, and his skeleton was more than a man's, for the thin fringe frames of huge wings arched up from his spine, the substance of his senescent hunch. He had fleshy hands and feet, wrinkled skin sagging and dry. But beneath the cloth he was naked as it is possible for a man to be, and through the gaps in his bones Seven could see the choppy silver waters of the lake. Through those same spaces ran two black lizards chasing each other up and down his barrel rib cage like squirrels around an oak tree. They chattered and hissed as they passed, flicking their tongues at his clavicle, his pelvis. Their eyes were white, like the eyes of blind men, and once in a while one would pause briefly, as though he had found a walnut and gnaw on one of the ferryman's vertebrae. Idle looked chagrined, pulled his robe back over the racing lizards. It's not so bad, really. I've gotten used to them, but I suppose that they require an explanation as surely as a bone coin. The Ferryman's Tale. There are some who say the moon is dead and trace their lineage there. They are wrong, and if you would believe the scripture of such creatures, you would surely believe anything. The moon is ever fertile. She cannot turn to look at herself in the ocean's mirror, but that a peony with crystal edges blooms from her navel. When she speaks, oysters fall from her mouth, oysters and tadpoles with wiggling tails. In the dark of the world, before there were eyes to open and call it black, she was whole and perfect, and did not change the shape of her mouth. But in the dark, as anything else, there were drifting winds and currents, and these blew gently against the ribs and shoulders of Moon, causing her to slowly spin in the sky, her arms outstretched as a child will do when she floats upon a clear and blue-green inland sea, letting the little kissing waves push against her body. When the stars left the sky, folk do not lie on that score at least. Their going left sucking holes in the dark, and winds issued from them as from a burst balloon. Poor Moon was battered on all sides by these whistling winds, and she began to spin faster and faster. As she spun in the sky like a dervish, the winds were so fierce they began to peel off slivers of her flesh, pale and translucent and shimmering. These slivers drifted dreaming to earth, feather slow and fragile as petals. Finally, Moon had nothing left for the empty sky to peel away. The little black core of her rested at last in a lightless hollow, no bigger or brighter than a speck of soot. But as all things will do when they are allowed some respite, Moon began to grow again, for she cannot help her fecundity. She turned this way and that, and peonies bloomed from her navel, chrysanthemums exploded from her palms, oysters and tadpoles fell out of her mouth. Pine boughs snaked around her waist. In her hair, saplings writhed and danced in blind ecstasy. And it was not long before the moon was full and vast again, as she had been. But the star-sparse sky had become like a river flowing between a few sharp rocks, and the currents were more fierce than they had ever been. No sooner was she round and bright, but they began to peel off her flesh once more. And so the moon waxes and wanes from a swell of light to a speck of soot. Poor, lost little Moon, who gets only the briefest moments of respite. We are sorry for her. We feathers, we petals, we sloughed-off children. Moonskins the sane are, cast away like plumskins. We are the drifting shells the black winds blow from her, silver dim as the shadow cast by foxglove at moonrise, clear and hard as frozen glass. Once we waged a holy war against the rotting heretics who cling to a false moon, but they do not mourn for their dead as we do. Attrition is a terrible thing when you must bear it alone. Long ago we gave in. If they wish to amuse themselves with morbid fairy tales, we will not spoil their games. We persevere, knowing the truth, even in the face of their perversion. I am sure that I have given the impression of maleness to you. It seemed to suit the work. But we are not male and neither female. The petals of the moon have no sex, no children, no marriage. Most of us drop each month from her flesh, and if they survive, like turtles sent across the sand into the welcoming sea, then we are replenished. We are not equipped for children. We are tiny moons, and moons do not couple, do not increase the number of aggregate moons. Neither do we eat the 5 cereals as men do, but suckle wind and drink dew. We age slowly as stones, and it is difficult for us to die, though it does happen, as it is possible to smash a quartz-riddled rock. Thus it is that I am old enough to be able to tell you that I raised the rose dome of Shadukium over the diamond turrets of the city in the days before it withered to marrow. I was an architect then, and I was sought out by the city fathers to cap their walls with flowers, flowers which would not fade nor wilt nor fall. It was thought by some that a walking sliver of the moon would know something about permanence. I was promised a wine vat filled with opals and silver as payment. They were always decadent. Nothing has truly changed. In those days, Shadukium was a spiky forest of scaffolding. They were still cutting slabs of earth away to plant buildings like saplings in the wet black soil. How the city of metal and merchants began obsessed with growing things. The diamond turrets were only lately erected, their facets still tapped and chiseled by workmen with no fear of heights. The roads were tamped with feet, not rolling stones of gold and silver. The Assad was canopied in plain wool. How we match, you and I. I remember the city before it was marrow. We remember it after. This is history before history, boy, and I was there. I instructed some few of my siblings to make their nests on the sparkling turrets or platforms below them and await me, while I flew into the world to seek out an imperishable rose. In the garden. The girl had watched the boy disappear into the palace like a bee buzzing into the mouth of an alligator. She followed as close as she might, wanting to extend just a little longer, the time in which she was not alone, not cold, not silent. While he went into that shadowy, many-towered place, the place she could never go, the girl paced out the square that was to hold Dinarzade and her husband with her little feet. The scaffolding was half up, the chestnuts bent forward and around, their bare stick limbs thatched and wired with gold to make a canopy thick enough to shield Dinarzade's veiled head from the eye of heaven. The girl wondered what the eye of heaven might see through so many branches and layers of silk. The sun was not quite up. She and the boy had either become much better at their little game, or Dinarzade had become much less vigilant. Her friend was safe in his warm bed, she was sure of it, piled with fox fur and wool. Perhaps the dew wet his hair at the brow, perhaps not. The peacocks wandered round the garden, their green-violet tails dragging in the flower beds, their blue heads popping up behind clusters of late-fruiting berries. The girl and the peacocks had always been wary of each other. They did not know how to sing. She did not know how to affect an ostentatious display. Peacocks are not entirely wild, and she was not entirely tame. But on this day of all days, she made peace and tightened her throat enough to make a squeaking peahen's cry. A cobalt bird ventured out from its briar, after nipping her fingers once or twice, nestled its head in her hands. She longed for the lake, but she longed more for her birds, her geese, the untamed ones that dipped into the garden for flowers and glittering insects and then went on when the winter came. The long emerald feathers brushed at her cheeks as the creature gesticulated, and she laughed, low and piping, an owl's evening cry. "Is there anything that does not do as you say?" came a voice behind her. The boy emerged from a chestnut chapel, and the peacock started, hissed in his direction, and huffed off, its tail held high in indignation. Many things. Gardeners, sisters, sultans. Well, you've yet to learn their mating cries. I'm sure you'll get it eventually. The girl grinned sidelong. You should be in bed. You will get us in trouble again. There's another banquet today for my sister's new family, her suitors, mother and father, and 37 brothers and sisters, if you can believe it. I haven't even tried to count the cousins. He gave a short, sharp laugh, like a bow twanging. They killed a giraffe. I'd never even seen one, but they brought the spotted thing in through the back gate so they can all feast on the neck. Do you think the neck will taste good? I'll try to bring you some if you like, but truly no one will care if I've run off again. They're used to it by now, and she can hardly throw a fit in front of her new relations. They'll be dancing and eating until their feet or their tongues wear through, one or the other. The girl began her pacing again, wiping her peacock warm hands on her skirt. Would you tell me a tale in the daytime? The boy said shyly. Does it not seem strange even to ask? To talk by first light instead of last? Is there anything that does not do as you say? The girl asked archly. He blushed. You know my cry. I do not know yours, he mumbled, not meeting her gaze. A thin kind of sunlight, not so very different from moonlight, seeped through the clouds as through a cheesecloth, tipped the trees in wet light, and slanted down the edge of the girl's long, straight nose. Her hands were cold with morning, the garden paths damp and shivering. She drew him away from the newborn shadows cast by the chestnut chapel, and into a thorny, bloomless bramble, not unlike the first one they had shared, save that this was bare and brown, the thorns overhead dripping dew. The boy settled himself with sure habit, and reached for her hands to warm them as he would have with one of his younger siblings. She let him rub the skin of her fingers until they tingled red and hot, and began again. It seemed obvious to me that you could not raise a rose that did not know deep in its stem and roots how to wilt and die, the ferryman said. But, I reasoned, you might freeze one in its blooming. The ferryman's tale continued. There are mountain peaks which no poor earthbound creature can see. Clouds hang from them like prayer flags, veil them and shroud them, and we would not see them either if the sky were not for us a road, if we could not see that the road keeps going past what you would call the summit, the peak, the tip. To these hidden places I flew, extending moon-blown wings as far as I might. Their tips frosted, their shadows on the snow were fitful and pale. From my chest hung a long leather strap which held a sackful of what would pass as money on the ceiling of the world. I was so close to the sky, I could smell its sweat. And if the moon, our poor besieged mother, had not been resting in her cold, dark core, I would been able to touch her as she spun. In time, I came to a peak beyond which the road does not extend. I do not say there is no higher crag, but it is the summit of the Hussein, and as the rocks far below were the summit of men. Perhaps some other thing laughs at my peak, calling it but a valley, a respite from the heights. I do not know. It is not my place to know. I flew as high as I was able, and my wings burned with the effort. I walked in the snow shoals, ringed by sharp stones, ringed by crags like the prongs of a crown. The peak of a mountain takes many shapes, and this one was a circle of land with granite teeth all around the edge, cut with many frozen rivers and ponds, which once had flown with water, and when the mountain table was lower, in the history, before history, before history. Along these old, hard rivers were tiny houses, all of glass or ice or both. I suspected they had once been made of glass and broken in the harsh winds of the country, but froze again so quickly no one noticed the shattering. Perhaps this had happened so many times that there was nothing left of them but shatter, held together by surprised gasps of ice. To these houses I shuffled in snowshoes made of wicker and my own feathers. When I reached the center of town, I sat myself down in the snow and waited, my wings twitching in the drifts, drawing quick, lively patterns in the white. I was prepared to wait a good while. Hardly a week had passed before the shattered door of one of the houses cracked open and a small green thing shambled out to me. I had come to the kingdom of the Kabbas, and one of those reluctant, recalcitrant creatures was even then shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot before me. She was very much like an upright turtle, though even upright she was no more than past my knees. Her shell was as green as a girl's eyes, her limbs mottled as moss, leathery and lithe. Her hands and feet, between which there was little enough difference, were large and webbed like a duck's, but her wrists and ankles were thick and knotted with muscle. She had a few thick yellow teeth in her face, which contorted into something of a beak under a fringe of brown hair cut like a monk's tonsure. It fell flat and frosty across her forehead and bald in the center. where the turtle girl had no skin, but a deep hollow in her skull which was filled with still blue water, save that, considering the snow and the wind, it had frozen solid and now shimmered silver and safe in the bones of its owner. "I am Yoy, who was born in the evening," she said, her gravelly voice like feet scraping the bottom of a lake. "And I am Idle, who was born, well, at night, I suppose. I have come to beg a treasure from you, but I have not come without barter." I opened my sack at last, the heavy old thing, and drew out a handful of green fruits, long and glossy. Yoy sniffed at them, and her black eyes widened. "Cucumber," she whispered. "You are very wise, Yoy, who was born in the evening. I have culled cucumbers for you from the world over, slicers and picklers, yellow and green and white as a ghost night glows, sandwich quality, and rough, hardy breeds good enough to be boiled in stew. Gherkins the size of your thumb, and rare hybrids, tiny as peas. There's even a southern varietal whose blossoms are red as a heart, and the meat of the fruit blushes orange." The Kappa's mouth watered, though her saliva froze at the corners of her lips. "And what is it you wish to trade for?" she asked. "A rose which will live forever, and never fade, or wilt, or drop petal." "Does it seem to you, Idle, who supposes he was born at night, that roses bloom in this place?" "Are not the Kappa great tenders of plants? Are your reputations undeserved? Surely in your shattered houses there are many wonders, or the world is much deceived." The little turtle sighed. "It is possible that we still possess what you desire, the rose which was born in a lizard. But in these times of still and cold, it is rarely our habit to part with our hard-won graftings. Even cucumbers, precious, delicious cucumbers, do not grow so well here. But such is the choice we made." The tale of the lizard's lesson. "I was no one's beloved daughter. I understand that in tales told off the mountain, in stories told around hearths like burning hearts, it is always a king's son or a merchant's best-taught boy who is spirited away to some black kingdom or ventures forth to find a wife or a slab of gold. But I was nobody in particular. I was born in the evening. The water was violet, so was the sky. I hatched in a nest of unripe berries and brambles and ran toward the water with all my brothers and sisters, praying that no kestrel or osprey or alligator would snatch us out of life just as we came into it. Many of them never felt water on their webbing. We wallow in our pools and rivers, we Kappa. We are drawn to the water, the deep of it and the loam. The water in our skulls calls to the waters of the world. We love our pools, their catching of star which is born in the water and cloud which is born in the reeds, in the perfect mirrors of their surfaces. And should a terrible, naughty, wicked thing who was born in a house stumble into that perfect water and splash about and churn up mud, we certainly ought never to be blamed for biting them soundly. The pool of my birth was a little pond, greenish-brown, with a few reeds sprouting like hair on its banks, and 3 matronly lilies which grew close together, drawing their yellowed petals round them like woolen shawls. She was not a grand pool, or a tempestuous river, splashing her way through a century of rock, just a circle of water in the dark of a wood, neither deep nor wide. But she was mine. No kestrel had snatched me up before I sank into her evening mire with gratitude, and I loved her. I scrabbled in her shallows to keep her free of weeds. If a farmer came to draw her waters into his bucket, I gnashed my teeth at him and narrowed my black eyes to slits. If a miller's daughter came to bathe in the deeps, I pulled her hair with my thin fingers and bit her where her spine joins her hips, and soon enough she shrieked her way home. This is how we lived, connected, each in our pool, connected each by each, born in the evening to born in the morning, by rivulets of rain trickling from pond to creek to river. And we kept our water still and balanced in our skulls, for we do not like to lose it. For days after, until we are full again, we swoon and dream and are blind, while the water swells up once more. Soon enough, all manner of beastly things managed with their dry brains to discover this, and they made endless sport of bowing to us. We are polite, ever polite. Manners are our provincial pastime and native dialect. We may bite them when they trample our homes, but how can we refuse a bow? We are compelled to bow in return, and then I suppose it is very funny for them to watch us stumble about and fall down like drunk turtles. I taught my 3 lilies to give fruit. We are very good at instructing the world to bend and bow to us. It learns such things from us, things it would never have thought to try on its own. I bought peach plants as exempla for my lilies, and by patient tutorial coaxed sweet small berries from them, though they were reluctant, as all old women are, to try new things. The lily berries who were born at noon tasted of paper and crystallized honey and dust. Because of the lesson I taught the lilies, I was allowed to follow the trickling streams from pond to pond and join the grafters and seed splicers of the greater Kappa, who spent their days in contemplation of the infinite lessons we had yet to give. And in charting those, we had already completed in illuminated catalogues. The vaulted ceilings of the greater Kappa were whorled with leaves and vines, and if, while sketching a theoretical pumpkin tree and its symbiotic attendant in the margins of a treatise on the unassuming apple, always keeping one's posture pleasantly straight and one's water in one's head, a turtle was hungry, she had only to reach up and pluck a sweet, wet cucumber from the window frame, and her belly would be satisfied. With a basket of lily berries, I entered those green vaults, nervous as a child on her first day of school. I was given a desk below a window of cucumber flowers so sheer I could see my way through to the valley outside, all ablossom with hypotheses. When I had been there for 3 years and produced only a few modest successes, a blue lime blossom, the oolong melon, the lemon macaque, I was sent into the field with Yazo, who was born at the bottom of winter. We were to return in a year to teach our own variant on the humble workaday rose. She was a year ahead of me, but considered a tragic mistake. Her first lesson, the pomegranate ant, had seemed to promise so much, yet she had done nothing but catalogue since she arrived. Therefore she was punished by being partnered with an untried turtle, and I was cautiously prodded to work harder by being yoked to the puzzling genius who refused to work. We were decades from our greatest collaborations, the upas, who was born by the water, the ixora, which was born burning, and but a year, give or take, from the rose, which was born in a lizard. Yazo was pretty, her face an unusual yellowish green, her tonsure glossy and black, but her hair was messy, her eyes always tired. There were little holes in the webbing between her fingers, small as needle pricks, but I saw them. As we walked out from the seated doors of the greater Kappa, I shouldered her pack as well as my own, so as to save her the effort. We are polite, ever polite, as I have said. Yoi was born in the evening, she said, after we had been walking in fields for a time, following the curve of the river which flowed through the central room of the greater Kappa and out again into the world. Do you suppose that when our water spills out and afterwards fills up again like a basin emptied in the morning and filled at night, that we are the same Kappa, the same dear turtle that we were before? I do not know, Yazo, who was born at the bottom of winter, I stammered. I have never considered it. I have spilled out my water once a month since I entered the cucumber vaults, she said softly, dreamily, looking out over the warm water and the drifting milkweed mayflies. What? I cried, aghast. Why would you do such a thing to yourself? It's terrible, obscene. Perhaps I am teaching myself a lesson, was her only answer, and we walked in stubborn silence which would not give us up. I looked again at the holes in her webbing and her frazzled hair, her peculiar skin. I saw why the other Kappa did not like Yazo. She was ragged and strange and possibly mad. But still I did as she said. And what she said was that we were bound for the kingdom of Glass Rain, a far-off prairie land whose folk had discovered a novel way of ferreting out the answers to things. In need of answers, we turned our shells to the grasslands, and I thanked the stars each night that the journey was not so long as a month, so that I would not have to witness Yazo's scarification. The kingdom of Glass Rain was indeed full of wild grasses, which blew over the flats like waves rolling in with high tide. They were green and gold, and their stalks were silvery gray, and the waves were very beautiful. All ringing the dell were red rocks and squat, flat-topped hillocks, streaked in pale swaths of yellow stone. It was cold, the sky was high and brittle, the long roofs of the capital tiled like a turtle shell, glinting clear and sharp in the distance. We were received, in a manner of speaking, at the gate of the local academy, which was a thick, dusty cedar door carved in a complicated pattern of interlocking lizards. I say in a manner of speaking, because we were not, at first, sure that anyone at all was there. just inside the shadowy threshold, which smelled of hay and eggs and old cedar, polished by 100 hands. "Please," a voice said, small and gentle, like a shivering cat pawing at the kitchen window. "Who is this? Who wishes to enter the breeding house?" But there was no one standing where the voice seemed to be born, only the beginning of a long hall filled with hushed voices and the sounds of clacking claws on glass. "I am Yoi, who was born in the evening, and this is Yazo, who was born at the bottom of winter, of the Greater Kappa, who have come to ask answers of you." I aimed my speech where I thought it should go, but the voice sounded again farther off to my right. "I am sorry. I know you cannot see me, and that is disconcerting. My name is Ostraya. I am the Princess of Glass, and I keep this house. If you have questions, I am she who will breed the lizard that will have your answer." We were somewhat nonplussed by this, as you might imagine. "But where are you? Why can we hear you and yet see nothing?" The voice laughed a little, as if at a very old and no longer particularly funny joke. I felt a weight fall on my hand, cool and hard, a hand of glass. The glass rain took me. The Tale of the Glass Princess. In this country, when we speak of the glass rain, we do not wax poetic. It is not a quaint local figure of speech. We speak of the spring, new and green and grass-scented, which brings clouds so white and pure they have no scent at all. The clouds crawl in and let loose their bows, and the glass rain comes upon us. The drops are slivers of glass, a broken mirror falling from the sky. They pile on the grass, cutting it low like terrible hard snowflakes. They scream as they fall. They slash the air and catch the cloud light. They flash and flare. For weeks after, the roads crunch and clatter beneath our feet. When the clouds come, mothers hurry their children indoors. Bankers seal themselves up in vaults. Cobblers barricade themselves behind row after row of iron-toed shoes. All crouch and listen as the rain clatters and shatters and shivers to pieces on the tile roofs and falls off the eaves in a rainbow of reflected storm colors. I was caught outside. My mother is the queen of glass, and I can hardly begin to tell of her beauty. Even as a child, there were times when I could not speak for awe of her silver hair and silver eyes, her lashes like spun sugar, her lips so red that apples envied her. She was the breeding mistress then, as I am now, and her fingers were ever bandaged, for lizards are tempestuous, wild creatures. In this country, lizards are not plentiful. We brought them with us when we were nomads so many generations ago. We've given up trying to remember what land was our first home. But bring them we did, and bred them in the warm burrows where they cooed and hissed happily over clutch after clutch of eggs. Who first noticed the markings on their backs? Who can say? A woman, man, child? A king, a queen, a pauper, a knave? There is a book on a golden podium in my mother's hall which says, with many pictures in costly scarlet ink, that a cook with wooden shoes once sought a novel way to cook cabbage. One evening he produced the most amazing dish for the royal banquet, towers and turrets of shaped cabbage, stuffed with raisins and goat meat, with cabbage trellises draping over cabbage rivers and steamed in black wine. When the cook was asked how this extraordinary display came about, he produced his pet lizard, which had in the markings on its back a complex and magnificent recipe, carefully filigreed in scale and spine. From that day forward, lizards were culled and read, and though not all of them had recipes written upon their backs, many had stories and equations, formulae, prophetic utterances, laws we had never heard of. The recording of the lizard's markings became the obsession of a generation. And then it was discovered that if one bred the lizards, new and marvelous markings resulted. If the lizard which showed the method for creating a beautiful copper spoon were bred to one which showed a new technique for mining tin, eggs would hatch with fat babies carrying the instructions for beating out a bronze sword, or schematics for a water drill, or an epic poem dealing with two statues on opposite ends of the square who fell in hopeless love, one of copper and one of tin. Thus was born the lizard calculus of the glass country. This is what the book on the golden podium in my mother's hall says. I do not know, but it makes a very pretty story. I was encouraged to eat cabbage each day as a child.
However it began, this is now the pastime of our aristocratic classes, the breeding of lizards one to the other, and certainly most extraordinary things have resulted. I am not surprised you come to us for answers. What answers have we not given when asked? Why, we have learned it is even possible to distill food from rocks and jewels. We have bred the very algebra of government onto the back of an iguana. Yet though we have bred lizards with rain hymns to those with a map of the glass molecule sketched in orange against black scales, and those with storm predictions to those with plans for a glass cathedral blazing red on green, we have never discovered a way to hold back the glass rain. When I was young, my mother kept me always at her side, against her silver hip in the crook of her silver arm. For her, a queen of glass is only a title, or a way to talk about her wonderful features, her customary silver crinoline, her glassy wet scent that drifts after her like pine trees dripping dew to a moist forest floor. For me, it is simply what I am. She let me out of her sight only once, when my favorite lizard, a huge, fat fellow with a map to the Antipodes subtly drawn in brown on his dry, parchment-colored hide, broke his braided silk leash and went bounding across the grasses, his whipping tail held high. I tore after him, my mother in her glittering dress and glass parasol calling after me, calling my name across the green. But I could not let him go. He was meant to be bred to a sleek little black female with a yellow navigational chart glinting on her belly. We had high hopes, and besides, he always slept with me at night. He would be lonely out in the cold. Soon I was quite far away from my mother, though I could still hear her high, even call. The storm came quickly that day. None of the lizards had predicted one that season. The white clouds rolled in like horses stumbling, and with a terrible crack, like a knife thrust through the mirror, the glass rain fell. I felt it. I must have felt it. But when I think back on it now, I cannot remember any pain. I cannot remember hurt, or skin slicing open, or the edges of the rain meeting the edges of me. But meet they did. Thousands of slivers of glass fell screaming into my skin, piercing my shoulders, my hands, my scalp, my cheeks, my legs. Ah, there it is. I remember the legs hurt when they went. In so many places, so quickly that I was rooted to the spot by the glass that had poured so suddenly into me, like water filling up a vase. In fact, it was so quick, and so many slivers fell that day, that when the storm had passed, I stepped away from the prairie and onto the road again, and to my surprise, a girl of glass stepped out of the girl of skin. So much glass, so quickly. More of me was glass than flesh in that moment, and so it has been ever since. My mother was frantic. She culled lizards from every kingdom, even fresh stock with nothing at all on their backs. Clutch after clutch of eggs were laid in hopes of finding a cure. She sent letters to every doctor and wizard and witch, begging them to turn her daughter to flesh again. They even, I hesitate to say it, fed some few of the breeding lizards which seemed to have glass lore on their backs, slices of my old skin, which had been gingerly carried from the field. It did not matter. I remained glass. They tried rolling me in pollen, or clouding the glass with oil or paint or mud and grass, but I am made of rain. It all slides away. Finally, on a day when it was so clear that roaming squirrels were blinded, drifting snow fell on those fields, and walking with my sorrowing mother, her silver hair limp and strung with flakes, I felt my skin frost over, forking lines of frost shooting over my cheeks, my arms, my belly. My breath fogged in the air, and the sun shone through my hair just as it would a real girl's curls. My mother threw her arms around me. Her warm fingers stuck to me, but she only laughed and wept and called me her darling. We strode through the fields. She picked crocuses for me and gave me honey cakes to eat. We talked of the lizards and of the rain, of silly things we always talked about when I was only a voice and a weight on the couch, but they seemed brighter and more important now that she could see that my frost-fringed eyes closed when I laughed. But it cannot snow all the time. On those few days when the sun and snow join hands, my mother and I go walking in the high and brittle grass. When all the other days dawn snowless, we weep and tend the lizards in silence, and I try to spare her the pain of hearing my voice without seeing me. I am the ghost of her daughter, and I am sorry. I should not have run off. That silly old lizard. I should not have done it. But in secret, I think glass is very beautiful. I, among all possible village girls, may stand in the glass rain and look into the clouds as they weep their hard, cutting tears. They cannot hurt me any more. I became the breeding mistress in my mother's place long before I ought to have inherited it. The lizards love me. They can bite me all they like. My glass fingers never feel it. Their teeth leave no mark. I am good at it, better even than my mother, and it was I who discovered the way of rendering jewels to food, for which I was much praised. But my poor mother, she cries out for me at night, and cannot see that I am there. And we will pick up next week with our Kappa adventure. There's a lot going on there. Connections to the rest of the book. I mean, one of the big things about the Orphan's Tales is sort of the examination of truth. So, each sort of kind of creature has their own set of beliefs about the world, and I think everybody else is wrong, much like every kind of creature in this world does. And so here we find out that though the manticore thinks that it came from the sun and has this whole beautiful legend about it, it was created in a lab, little IVF baby. And then but is that explanation, true or truer? There's no, and then the Orphan's Tales will never come down on any one side of it, really. There's always a different version, each one of them more and less true than the last. So that's a big theme floating through all of this. Also, the whole glass thing. So a bit of trivia about me that I don't think I ever talked about. I ran through a plate glass window when I was 10. My legs are covered in scars. You would not believe it. It is, I had over 400 stitches, and a very bad doctor. So they are some gnarly scars. He did not do a good job stitching me up. I remember being a child and going from doctor to doctor, plastic surgeons, because my mother wanted me to not have legs like that. And each one of them saying, "Oh, God, did a terrible job." And then saying that there was really nothing they could do unless I wanted to not move for 2 years. And I didn't, so I still have the same scar that I always did. So it's very much drawing from memory of that, because I don't remember the pain. It must have been very painful, but I don't remember anything of it. I think that I have written about it. It's in 13 Ways of Looking at Space-Time. But, like, it is fiction. There are many things in 13 Ways of Looking at Space-Time that are not drawn from my life, though that is probably the most autobiographical story I've written. So that definitely comes from my own life. I love Kappa, so I'm not surprised that I stuck them in there. I just think they're fascinating little creatures, and of course they're pretty extra gross. In actual Japanese mythology, I've made them slightly less gross. But yeah. Does anyone have any questions? There's that awkward moment. Glass rain is a phrase in Russian. It is what you call when it's raining and sunny at the same time. So that's where that comes from. Schoolgirl Kappa. Yeah, I've seen I've never seen a portrayal of Kappa in current fantasy, televised or on the page, that I have agreed with. So, I like my Kappa, but I think I would write different Kappa now, probably. My interests are different. What's my next world? I'm writing a book called The Quidnuncs right now, although it probably will not be called that in its final form. I've learned my lesson over the years of not naming books words that people can't pronounce. But it's kind of a combination of Finnish folk magic and Where the Wild Things Are, and a boy Persephone story, gender reversed Persephone story. I saw we stand the gender non-binary asexual creatures. Yeah, I think I really got bored of gender by this point in the story. I do remember being like, there has to be better options than just male and female, and just started throwing things out. But I guess that's probably why this series won the Tiptree Award.
where do I get the inspiration from my vivid imagery in these tales? I mean, I try to tell you guys about it when I remember, but as those of you who've been listening to this from the beginning know, I wrote this series starting in 2002. And this book in particular was written in 2005. So like in 2004 and 2005. So like, I mean, it's all over the place, and it's old, and I don't remember a lot. So when I remember what particularly inspired things, I do try to let you know. I know that some of this lizard stuff is inspired by a book called The Malachite Casket, which is a book of folktales from the Caucasus Mountains. A bunch of like stories from miners. My favorite one is called The Lizard Princess of Copper Mountain. So that was definitely an inspiration for this section. And it's just folklore from around the world. They come from everywhere. There's bits and pieces. I disassembled and dissected every fairy tale I'd ever thought of or heard of and rebuilt them from the pieces. Is the pandemic changing my writing? Well, in that it's been very hard to write because we have 2 adults working in this house who work at home and are freelancers, and we have had no childcare until recently. So that's been very difficult. It's hard for me to tell right now if the pandemic has changed my writing or like the last like almost 2 years of being pregnant and giving birth and raising a small screaming infant like have changed my writing. And I am definitely not the person that I was before all that happened. But is it the pandemic or is it the child? It's hard to say. I definitely I wrote this story for Strange Horizons that's going to come out in September, and the first version of that story is kind of a mess because just like everything was in my head, the pandemic and the protests, and like I could not separate the real world from like I couldn't get it out of myself, and so it had to be edited into not being just a mishmash of notions about how everything's fucked. It is very difficult to keep a cheerful mindset. I think that I probably would have finished the book I'm working on a while ago if it weren't like a middle grade fantasy that's not supposed to be like the darkest thing of all time. But yeah, no, it's hard to say. I think I probably won't know for a little while because you're in it. When you're in it, it's so hard to tell how it's changing you. I'm sure it is. Everything affects everything. There's nothing that doesn't affect writing sooner or later. You know, when you write a book, it is just tearing out a chunk of you and freezing it in time. So the chunk that comes out in this time is going to be weird, I'm sure. I'll be starting the sequel to Space Opera here in a week or 2. And I guarantee you Space Oddity, which is what it's called, is not going to be anything like it would have been if I had written it when I should have, which was last year. Will I write more about September ever? Will she be a mom? Well, you know, you see the little daughter in the beginning, so you know there's a strong implication that they have a kid eventually. I absolutely will probably end up writing more about September. I wrote a little prequel piece kind of to explain the election to kids, and that's up on my website. That's the beast who fought for Fairyland, I believe is the whole title. I think maybe it's longer than that. Terrible, I don't even remember my own titles. It's also up on Serial Box just recently as an audio original, so you can listen to it there. So you know, when things happen here and there, I will probably end up doing things like that, and who is to say that I won't end up writing a book again. 10 years next year. It's the 10-year anniversary of the first Fairyland book coming out, which is crazy. It's just madness. But Fairyland, it will always be a huge part of my life, and I'm sure that there will be other adventures eventually. Will they be September's adventures? I don't know. I mean, who knows? Who can say? I cannot possibly say, but I'm sure that I will never entirely leave the world of Fairyland behind. Yeah. Well, let me do my outro stuff, and then you guys can ask more questions if you want to while I'm talking. Yeah, The Beast Who Fought for Fairyland Until the End and Further Still. That is the title of it. Long ass titles. It's easy to remember the books because like I toured for the books and everything, but like I wrote that short story. I started it 3 days after the 2016 election, and then spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to end it, and then that I have not thought about it since. So it's hard for me to remember the full title, but you can listen to it on Serial Box. And a bunch of my other stories have just come out on Serial Box as well, so you can definitely hear some totally awesome audio fiction by me, including my fairies versus robots wrestling story and my football story. It's all sports all the time up there now. So yeah, for legal reasons, this has not been an audiobook of the Orphan's Tales. It is a one-woman show. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can buy them from your local independent booksellers web portal. If you would like to support mine, it is printbookstore.com, based out of Portland, Maine. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti. You can subscribe to my Patreon and read the Finnish folk magic first 6 chapters of the book there at Cat Valenti. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live with anything that you might have missed. And you can, if you are so moved, drop something in the tip jar on my Instagram profile, YouTube profile, and website, which is catherinevalenti.com. You absolutely don't have to, but times are very tight for us and for all freelancers. So if you can contribute anything toward the continuation of this series, it is deeply, deeply appreciated, and I will thank you by name on the next stream. Yeah, I've refused to believe it's 10 years since Fairyland either. It's ridiculous. Fairyland and Deathless, both of them will be 10 years old next year. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. I will feel extra gross when they're 20, I guess. At least they're still technically in like book elementary school. Thank you all for coming tonight. We will continue on Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. I hope you are all safe, and everyone you love is safe, and things are going okay in your world. I love you guys, and I'll see you then. Bye.